welcome our viewers to our continuing discussion of the Old Testament. Today we'll be talking about some of the chapters from the text of Isaiah. Joining me for the discussion today are three members of the Brigham Young University Department of Ancient Scripture. To my left is the distinguished Professor Victor Ludlow. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Good to have you with us. Across the table from me is one of my old mentors, Professor Kelly Ogden. Thank you for coming, Kelly.
Very welcome.
And seated next to Kelly is one of the bright new stars on our Department of Ancient Scripture faculty, Professor Terry Szink. Glad to have you with us today, Terry.
It's good to be here.
And I'm Terry Ball, also from the Department of Ancient Scripture. Well, today we're going to look at the text of Isaiah some more. We're going to start with the 7th chapter. Now, this chapter and several of the chapters that follow after it are especially important because of the Messianic prophecies that they contain. So, why don't we begin by just kind of pointing out for our viewers some of the really important Messianic prophecies that are found in these next 5-6 chapters and what we can learn from them. So, let's start with chapter 7. Who'd like to begin?
Well, we could start off, I guess, here by outlining the frustration many readers have of this chapter here in the 7th chapter of Isaiah, which is also in the Book of Mormon, chapter 17 there in 2nd Nephi. And this is one of them that really starts to kind of bog them down a little bit. All of these names that are given here in these first few verses, the setting of it in the context is that Syria is becoming more and more dominant in the Middle East. It's beginning to encroach closer and closer to this particular area. And the two northern kingdoms of Israel, which includes the 10 tribes, and Syria have formed an alliance and tried to get all the other nations in the area to join with them to stop this Assyrian aggression.
Including the kingdom of Judah.
But Judah refuses to join. King Ahaz, Judah, Jerusalem, these are all similar names for the same country. There's just really 3 countries involved, although there's many, many names here. But sometimes they identify the country by its capital, a dominant tribe, the king, some other feature, just like we use different names to refer to our country.
Syria is Damascus.
Or Aram.
And Israel is going to be Samaria or Ephraim.
Ephraim, the dominant tribe, or Pekah, or the son of Remaliah, as their leader.
And Judah will be the house of David, or Judah.
Or Jerusalem, or Ahaz the king.
Or Ahaz the king.
But the gist of it is that since Judah won't join with them, Syria and Israel attack Judah. And poor King Ahaz is getting beaten. And that's the setting for it, where the Lord commissions Isaiah to go and talk to Ahaz and give him comfort.
What's the essence of the message that he gives to Ahaz?
Prophets do get involved in politics.
In this case,
the Old Testament teaches. So the Lord says to Isaiah, go down and meet the king. This is the king and the prophet meeting at the most important, most sacred place in the city is where the temple is. Mm-hmm. But then the other very important spot is where the water is. Nobody lives in that part of the world without water. So they're going down to the water source. It says, Isaiah is supposed to take his son, Sha'ar Yashuv, meaning the remnant shall return. Yeah, thy son at the end of the conduit of the upper pool of the highway of the fuller's field. There's a mouthful, huh? The fuller. Okay, who's that?
That's a launderer, right?
Somebody who cleans cloth. Okay, he needs water. Often his occupation would be carried out where the water source is. So it's probably right near the Gihon Spring, right at the foot of
somewhere in the Kidron
city.
Valley.
In the Kidron Valley
where there are springs or
so there they
sources.
are, the king and the prophet, going to have a talk.
And the message he gives them is, don't worry. This alliance that they've tried to establish, Damascus and Syria, they're not going to trouble you. You don't need to fear. Don't be shaken by what's going to happen, and trust in God. And I think that's a message as timeless as the Scriptures. If we trust in God, we don't need to worry about external factors.
And within 65 years, he's already prophesying Ephraim's going to be broken up as a people.
That's found in verse 8, right?
Verse 8. But obviously he senses that Ahaz is not accepting this too well. I mean, that's easy for the prophet to say. It's not his army getting beaten. And so in verse 11, the prophet invites the king to ask for a sign. Ask it either the depth or the height above, whatever you want to. I mean, we're told not to go to the Lord and ask for a sign, but here the Lord through his servant is saying, just so that you'll know, you can ask for a sign.
So that you know that this is a message from Jehovah and that you should trust in him.
Right.
Now, why is he so concerned that he's going to trust in Jehovah in the face of this attack from Israel and Syria?
Well, he may already know the heart and mind and some preliminary plans that Ahaz has made or is making in connections with forming an alliance with the Assyrians. But that's still, you know, even without that, the basic message that you just alluded to is trust in the Lord. With the Lord on your side, so what if there are 2 nations, 20 nations attacking you?
You know,
He says, ask for a sign. Usually we're not supposed to ask for signs, but what he means is a spiritual confirmation that the prophecy he has just spoken really will happen.
But he doesn't want to bother the Lord here, which is sad. He could receive a spiritual witness, but for whatever reason, whether because he's afraid of what the confirmation would mean as far as his accountability, he doesn't want the sign.
In fact, I think he's feigning piousness here when he says, ask a sign, and he says, oh, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord.
I love what Isaiah says, too. He says, it is a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary my God also? So he's
you can play games with men, but don't try to play games with God. And then he says, all right, you won't ask for a sign, I'm going to give you one anyway. And I'm grateful he didn't ask for a sign, because this sign is so important. Brother Kelly, maybe you could read verse 14 for us and comment on it.
Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Emmanuel. Well, somebody's going to be reading this along and saying, now, wait a minute. What? They're there in the middle of the 8th century BC, standing at the city's water source and talking about politics, political things. Why are we throwing in a prophecy that is going to be fulfilled 700 years later? What does that have to do?
Explain what the prophecy is with the name Emmanuel and what this all means for us. And then,
okay, a virgin will conceive. The word is clearly a virgin. Many dispute that out in the world now. The scholars don't think it's.
It's just a woman who's not married.
Yeah, right? How does a virgin have a baby anyway?
The implication is that she's not had sexual relations. She's a virtuous. She's a virgin woman. She's not known a man.
By the Septuagint, the Greek rendition of this passage, and in the New Testament, and especially in the Book of Mormon, we're talking about a virgin who's going to have a baby.
So a virtuous, undefiled woman is going to conceive, which is, I don't know how many men would just go down a street and say, well, she will get pregnant and she will get pregnant. I mean, he obviously knows something that the Lord's told him about her future.
This is something unusual. This is something miraculous. Otherwise, what's so special about, unusual about a young woman having a son? I mean, this is going to be a virgin birth.
And his name will be
Emmanuel means God with us. And some write that off and say, well, that means the king or somebody else. But God with us means that God is coming down. He's condescending to actually be with us.
So that name precisely describes who Jesus of Nazareth was. He wasn't just a good man that God chose to die for us or put his spirit in. He was God. I like the way you said it, who condescended to come to earth to work this great and impotent atonement.
That's right.
Now back to the question you said, so if this is a prophecy about Jesus Christ, it's going to happen 700 years later, why is he telling it to Ahaz? How do you deal with that issue?
Well, there seems to be what scholars call a dualistic nature or multiple fulfillment potential in this prophecy. Some might argue, well, it only refers to the time of Isaiah. There must have been some woman there. She may not even know that she had been pointed out and designated that would have a son and call him Emmanuel, and those that were in attendance with Isaiah would say, yeah, Isaiah was a true prophet. I mean, how do you know a prophet? But of course, Matthew recognized the Messianic implications of this. And so some people would say, well, no, it only refers to Christ. It can refer to both. I mean, it fits.
So somebody contemporary with Isaiah
could have been a sign.
But that person would be a type for Jesus Christ.
That's chapter 8, right there.
In fact, some of them
that's another one.
That it's Isaiah's wife himself, or it's Isaiah's wife who will bear a child, and the point is that before the child's old enough to know good from evil, that the 2 kingdoms that are trying to form an alliance against Israel will be destroyed.
That would be 8 years, right?
Right.
Within 3 years, this prophecy is going to be fulfilled.
Well, actually, the prophecy here in chapter 7 would be, let's say, about 9 or so years. I mean, she apparently is not yet pregnant, so she will get pregnant, have the baby. Before the lad knows his right hand from his left, their way of saying knowing right from wrong. So within a decade, this is going to happen. The way I see chapter 8 is a little bit later.
Rezin were both killed within 3 years. I mean, that was literally fulfilled at
Yeah.
time space.
But the conflict continued for a while. And just to reinforce this here in chapter 8, now we know specifically the woman that's to have the son. It's the prophetess, the wife of the prophet, with a very long name about plundering, hastening, pillaging,
The
hurrying.
son's name.
Yeah.
Read those verses right there.
Oh.
That's good. This is 8:1. Moreover, the Lord said unto me, take thee a great roll, that's a scroll, and write in it with a man's pen concerning Maher Shalal Hashbaz. There's the longest proper name we have in the Bible. Huh? I took unto me faithful witnesses to record Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Yerebechiah. Well,
This is almost like a big press conference. I mean, these are the
we have
dignitaries
a
of the
painting
land.
of that, of Isaiah sitting there writing with two men standing by him. The two witnesses.
I didn't realize, I didn't put it in this context.
It's these two men. We have them named right here. Uriah, meaning the Lord is my light, and Zechariah, meaning remember the Lord. These are very good Hebrew names. I went unto the prophetess, not meaning a priesthood calling, but a wife, in this case, of the prophet. She conceived and bare a son. So apparently she is going to be a type of a later birth that will happen centuries hence.
So then we could say that Maher Shalach Hashbaz here in verse 3 is a contemporary of Isaiah that fulfills the prophecy of chapter 7, verse 14. And as such, he's a type of Jesus Christ, because ultimately only he is truly born of a virgin, and only he can rightfully bear the title, Emmanuel.
Yes.
Even though he would be called Jesus, I mean, that was what Mary was instructed to call him. He was in reality Emmanuel, God dwelling with us. That was the reality, even though as people would have associated with him, they would have called him
Now, answering the
Jesus.
question, though, why are we dropping this prophecy from centuries later, would be fulfilled centuries later, into this time period? Well, we're going to see all through the chapters of Isaiah. That's why he named his first son Yeshuv, the remnant shall return. Well, why does he name somebody that when nobody among the Israelites are even out of the land yet? In Isaiah's time, nobody's been exiled, but he has seen it. He knows that the Israelite peoples are going to be taken away, and that's imminent for the northern tribes. They'll be taken out, and nobody's prophesying they're coming back immediately. But his own people, the tribe of Judah, the remnant shall return. Despite some temporary setbacks, all these wars and commotion of centuries, yet the remnant must return, else how are you going to have the Messiah born among Jews in Bethlehem if the Jews aren't back there?
So Yeshuv becomes a walking testimony and reminder of Isaiah's prophecy.
Yes.
Now, for the sake of time, let me just say that the rest of chapter 8 and some more in chapter 7 contains a lot of warnings to Ahaz about the dangers, what will happen to these people if they decide to trust in Assyria to protect them from Syria and Israel rather than Jehovah. And we know from 2 Kings chapter 16 that he still makes an alliance with Assyria rather than trusting in Jehovah.
Right, and the warning, particularly in verses 6 and 7 there, where they refuse the waters of Shiloah. I mean, these gentle, clear, gentle flowing waters, but instead he'll give them the waters of the river, referring to Euphrates. In other words, if you don't get the gentle whisperings of the Spirit, then I guess the Lord's just going to have to deliver the message more powerfully, much more powerfully.
And the waters represent Assyria as well, this decimating deluge. It'll come through and reach right up to the neck. When you know that when Assyria came in and attacked Judah, how far did they get?
All the way to Jerusalem.
To the gates, to the
Right to
walls.
Jerusalem, right up to the neck. Remarkable prophecy. Well, let's take a look now at chapter 9, if we could. This is one that's well known, I think, by the saints because of what Handel did with portions of this, but there's some great Messianic prophecies besides that which has been celebrated in song. Let's begin with the beginning of it. It's a prophecy to Zebulun and Naphtali, talking about these people that live in a land of darkness, and the land really is dark.
The basalt stone.
The basalt stone. And the people who live in a fear of death. And of course, it's an area that's of prime military interest, and so they are constantly under warfare. They live in darkness and death, and that becomes the beginning for an introduction to verse 2. Professor Szink, why don't you read verse 2 for us?
Sure. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined.
Now, I can remember Professor Ogden teaching me about this verse in Israel. Why don't you comment what this means for us?
Well, most people wouldn't know instantly what Zebulun or Naphtali are all about, but if you look at a map of the tribes of Israel, Zebulun is Nazareth and vicinity. Naphtali is the Sea of Galilee and vicinity. We're talking about where Jesus was raised and where most of his ministry took place. That's the setting here. The land of the shadow of death. Now all the world's armies are marching through there. There's been a lot of death, but people that live in darkness of sin and apostasy, yes, but even as you said, the physical aspect of the land with all that volcanic stone, the basalt around there is pretty dark. But they've seen a great light. Notice the perfect tense verbs there, the prophetic tense. The people that walk in darkness have seen, because in his mind he has seen it. He's seen them.
Happened.
They have seen this great light, now with a capital L, that has come to this dark land to provide light and life.
So this prophecy really has two levels of interpretation. On a very literal interpretation, it's telling us where Christ will perform his mortal ministry in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, which was known as Nazareth, or Galilee in his day.
Yes.
And if you go there's cities with names like Nazareth and Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida, and Nain, and Cana, and is it fair to say that most of his mortal ministry, as far as time-wise is concerned, takes place?
Other than Jerusalem, it's right there, right around the Sea of Galilee.
So on one level, the prophecy is telling us where he's going to minister. On the other level, he's telling us what he will do as he brings light to those who walk in darkness, as you said, and I think hope to those who...
And it's the same with us. Here we are in a world of darkness, with facing death, the shadow of death hanging over every one of us. Nobody's getting out of this life alive, right? So he is the light.
And then the ways that he brings this light and peace and understanding to our life is highlighted in the famous verse 6 there. For unto us, you almost feel like you have to sing it, but you don't want to hear my singing. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. I mean, he'll have the rightful keys and authority here. And his name shall be, actually in the Hebrew, there are 4 little couplets here, so kind of in opposition to each other. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Peaceful Prince. And there's so many ways he's a wonderful counselor, not only in what he teaches us, but he's our advocate, a counselor with us, with the Father. A mighty God, I mean, he helped create the world. He advocated the Father's plan. He was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I mean, he was already a mighty God long before Isaiah, long before he was born.
There are some out there, Vic, who've tried to show that this was fulfilled by some mortal person or a king or something, but you can't explain away mighty God. El Gibor, that's God.
That's right.
We're only talking about one person.
And the everlasting Father, through divine investiture, representing the Father of life, of resurrection, of the gospel, of the church, and the Prince of Peace. I mean, that's what he promises us. He'll give us peace. These are just wonderful, powerful. I mean, you could take a full sacrament meeting talk on each of those 4 terms just out of this one little verse of Isaiah.
Is this not one of the greatest of the Messianic prophecies? And curiously enough, Matthew especially loves to draw on everything to show the Savior being fulfilled. This is not mentioned in our New Testament. This particular prophecy is just not there, but it's clearly about him. And after the severe dart blow of all the foreign foes, you know, all the political turmoil, there's a light that would come into the land.
And as it says in verse 4, it would break the yoke of his burden, the staff of his shoulder, and the rod of the oppressor. Mm-hmm. I love to ask my students, what is the yoke and the staff and the rod that he breaks?
The kinds that we have, you mean burdens of sin and oppression and economic health concerns and not understanding the purpose of life and existence.
By the way, look at the footnote there, 6a. Takes us to topical guide. But look at the topics. Jesus Christ prophecies about, God manifestations of, birth of Jesus, divine sonship of Jesus, authority, millennial reign. In other words, in this one verse, this is really curious too, in this one verse, the first lines of it, we actually have prophecy of his first coming, for unto us a child is born, okay? And the government shall be upon his shoulder. That wasn't 2,000
millennial
years ago.
Messiah.
That's still ahead. So
He moves from, in fact, the first few verses all deal with mortal Messiah, but as he gets going, he just can't help himself. He has to say, and look what's coming up, and he moves right into millennial Messiah.
That's right.
Well, let's move on. The rest of this chapter is a kind of a chastisement to these people for some of the things, these ancient apostate covenant people, with the warning that for all they're doing, God is mindful. He's going to deal with them fairly and justly, and his hand is stretched out still. That's a phrase we see often. What does that mean to say his hand is stretched out still?
you know, go ahead, Terry.
Well, I think we interpret a couple ways, and there, in fact, the ways I've understood it are almost exactly opposite. Generally, when you look at that phrase, the rest of Isaiah, and this is how one way it's interpreted is he's smitten them, and he's going to continue to smite them because they haven't repented. But we also know from a modern revelation that it can be interpreted almost exactly the opposite, a hand that's willing to help them if they're willing to repent.
Right in Isaiah, we have both uses, both definitions. In fact, this one, but his hand is stretched out still. The note down here, 12D, in spite of all, the Lord is available if they'll turn to him in a hand of mercy. But I submitted a little note to our Scriptures Publication Committee asking them to change that note, because the context of this one is clearly the opposite. As the next line says, for the people turneth not unto him.
Right.
To smite it. They don't seek the Lord, therefore the Lord will cut off. This is a hand that's coming down hard on them.
Chapter 10 here is a prophecy to Assyria and basically chastises them because although they were used as a tool, the rod of God's anger to punish the apostate covenant people, they didn't give God the credit. And he asked the question, shall the axe boast itself against him that heweth therewith? And I think that's all we'll say about 10. Chapter 12 is exciting because it has this beautiful psalms of praise. It'll be sung by those people who have the privilege of living with the millennial Messiah. But I'd like to spend the rest of the time we have during this discussion focusing on chapter 11. That's another really important Messianic prophecy.
Well, it's not only so important, this chapter is in every one of the standard works. We have it quoted here in the Old Testament. It's 2 Nephi 21. It's mentioned in the Joseph Smith history. He tells us that Moroni quoted this to him as part of his instruction.
It was about to be fulfilled.
And about to be fulfilled. And it's the subject of one of these question and answer sections, specifically section 113, where some three key terms of this chapter are asked to the Lord, and then the answer is recorded there in the Doctrine and Covenants. So this is obviously an important chapter with latter-day fulfillment.
And I think you really have to start almost a couple verses before where it talks about a prophecy about the destruction. And he says, for example, in verse 34, he shall cut down the thickest of the forest with iron, and Lebanon shall fall by mighty ones. So in other words, Assyria has come, Babylon has come, they've wiped out everything, and then from this just stem that's left, or from this root that's
Some
left
trees
over.
are going to be cut down, but then others are going to be raised.
Yeah, they will
It's
come
just
up
like a
from
forest that's been devastated, but out of it is going to come new rods and roots and saplings and so forth.
And of course, Assyria is a type for the latter-day wicked who will be destroyed. And we see then in chapter 11 a prophecy of how eventual triumph will come to the Messiah.
You know, one thing I love about this part of Isaiah is the prophet foretelling the restoration.
Yeah.
Joseph Smith is the prophet fulfilling the prophecies of the restoration. So, of course, Isaiah would talk about Joseph Smith.
And
He doesn't
Moroni
insert
would
his
teach
name
him
in
about it.
there.
I just wonder how much Moroni told him at first about not just what Isaiah said, but how it would apply to him, or whether this was a discovery experience that Joseph finally had to recognize. Oh, this is me.
So in chapter 11, verses 2 through 9 are these famous prophecies of what will happen when the millennial Messiah comes and ushers in the great theocracy of peace. Is it fair to say that starting in verse 10, he's talking about events that are antecedent to the coming of the millennial Messiah?
I would think so, yes.
And what is it? What do we learn there? I guess?
Well, first of all, when you talked about looking into the millennium, it's interesting that of all the many prophecies of the last days from all of the standard works, most of them just take us up to the millennium, rarely into. But this is where the curtain is opened, and we get this famous, kind of the lamb and the lion. Yeah. But as you were asking here, starting in verse 10 is the third major figure, as for this root of Jesse that will be as an ensign, a banner, a symbol, a gathering point, the gospel. Ensign means many things. But in the Doctrine and Covenants, this is where we really get some understanding of this, a person unto whom rightly belongs the priesthood and keys and other prophetic
this root of Jesse.
Yeah, this root of Jesse of verse 10 is definitely a prophetic figure. He's got power, he's got priesthood, he's got keys,
and he sets up the ensign among the Gentiles. What do we understand the ensign to be then?
The gospel.
The gospel, the Book of Mormon, the restoration, all the restoration. The root of David, for instance, refers to Jesus sometimes, but the root of Jesse here, clearly given the Doctrine and Covenants description, is the prophet Joseph
That's
Smith.
D&C section 113, right?
Right.
It's the Doctrine and Covenants.
It's amazing that how clear it is when it's saying he sets the gospel up amongst the Gentiles. Now we're talking about latter-day Gentiles, meaning those who are not Jews, right? And then they take the gospel, and what do they do with it?
Well, you have in verse 13, and Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah not vex Ephraim. In the days of Isaiah, those were the two protagonists. Ephraim was the dominant tribe of the north, Judah in the south. They were at war, and yet there's to be a time of peace where they work in harmony.
And that happens as the gospel is established amongst the Gentiles by the root of Jesse, and then they go and gather scattered Israel and bring them back to the covenant, and the enmity and the animosity is gone, right?
Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith together in one chapter here. They're the ones that do it more than any other two.
Although it implies a lot of work being involved with people assembling and gathering and all that, so that can include us as well.
So you've just read this to your children. What do you want them to remember, to learn from this altogether? Terry, why don't you address that question?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think one of the most important things is the beauty of and the vastness of the language of Isaiah, how he can say things that have meaning for his own day, and yet they can reach forward and talk about the meridian of time, and they can also talk about the events that are taking place now in these last days. And that's why Isaiah's words are great. That's why Nephi loved them. That's why we're told that we need to understand them and read them and love them and study them. I almost just want to conclude with a couple verses right at the end of chapter 12 that kind of sum it up. And he says, "Sing unto the Lord, he hath done excellent things. This is known in all the earth. Cry out and shout, thou inhabitants of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel in the midst of thee." And Isaiah, that's his message.
Well said. Thank you.
For more information on this program, visit our website at byubroadcasting.org.